For years, tight end strategy was easy. You take Travis Kelce early or you wait until later and you suffer. Now, it's become one of the deeper positions in fantasy football. How will you draft tight ends this year? Well, I'm going to take you through all of the options on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. Today we are talking tight ends. If you've missed our previous 3 shows talking about quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, make sure you check them out on YouTube. If you've got any questions, pop them in the comments below, or you can hit us up on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. You can also find my full rankings over at ffdfantasyfootball.com, and I've also got some articles out on Razzball at the moment as well. But without further ado, let's get into my number one for the tight ends. And my number one this year, as it is for most people, is Brock Bowers. This seems to be the consensus top pick, and he is going as early as the second round in a lot of early drafts. But I think that's a little bit crazy for me. I think there is a very small gap between Bowers and the guys to come. Sure, he was very good in his rookie season, but we do know that tight ends don't necessarily develop into their second season once they've got that starting role. He's the clear starting tight end in Vegas, but Vegas brought in a couple of very good young receivers. Jack Beck, we've got Dante Thornton. So there is the possibility that Bowers will lose some volume. Plus, they've got an excellent receiving running back suddenly in Ashton Genty. Geno Smith does come in and represent a slight improvement, but I don't think he's necessarily going to use Bowers more either. If anything, I think Bowers could take a step back. He wasn't even the clear number one last season, and on a per-game basis, he was barely ahead of Trey McBride as well. So I think that taking him in the second round is going to turn into very much a reach, and I would recommend having very few shares unless he drops in drafts or if you're in a tight end premium league, because he does get a lot of targets. Number 2 for me is George Kittle, and he's got the real potential to be a half PPR star. He gets far fewer targets and receptions, but gosh, he is efficient. Every season for the last 7 seasons, he's averaged at least 12.4 yards per reception. And in the last 2 years, he's been over 14, which is incredible for a tight end. He remains a real touchdown threat as well. And if he can stay healthy, he could easily win you your league. You can get him as late as the third round as well. And I think once you get to the third round, that represents real value for a guy who could be the top receiver in his team, with Deebo Samuel at the door and Brandon Ayuk looking very much injured. I think this could be an excellent season for Kittle, and I think he could be the real value pick depending on where he goes in your draft. Number 3 for me is Trey McBride, and he is a step behind Kittle. He's a little bit more consistent. He's more of a natural PPR option, but he's very much behind the top 2 for me. I think we've seen him sort of cap out from a yardage perspective, and I wouldn't surprise me if we see more Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. Having said that, we have only seen McBride score 9 touchdowns in his first 3 seasons, and if Kyler Murray can find him more in the end zone, which he said he's going to do, and not done, then McBride could certainly take that step forward and finally pay off on the potential that he thought he had last season. I personally don't think it's going to happen, though, and for me, I wouldn't consider him until about the 4th round of a half PPR draft and the 3rd round of a PPR draft. My number 4 tight end will surprise you. It is TJ Hockenson. He was a top 3 tight end in his previous 2 healthy seasons before struggling to come back from injury last year. Last year, he also had 0 touchdowns, yet he remained pretty solid when he was given the opportunities. He garnered at least 5 targets in his last 7 games, and I think that there's the potential that he could really step up this season. I think JJ McCarthy, as a essentially rookie quarterback, could latch onto the easier target, and the check down option will a lot of the time be Hockenson. I could see this really paying off for him this season. Having said that, I wouldn't go out of my way to get him. He is falling towards the 6th round odd, and I feel like that's around the right range for him. I think there's a big gap between him and the top 3, and this is more representative of my lack of love for Sam Leaporter than it is for my love of TJ Hockenson. And Leaporter does slot in as my number 1 tight end. And we saw a real drop in his usage last year. Jamison Williams coming in and being the clear number 2 guy really dropped Leaporter's targets. And he also spent a lot more time blocking as well. He was more efficient on a per reception basis, but he had a drop in his touchdowns. He had a drop in his receptions and his targets and his yardage Everything else was down last year, and I see no reason to believe that's going to rebound to his rookie season numbers. Having said that, he did look better towards the end of last year, and I do think he still represents solid value as a top 5 tight end. I'm just not willing to take him as early as he's going in draft. So unless he's falling into that sort of 6th round region, I think it is too early for Leaporter, depending, admittedly, on your league settings. David Njoku is my number 6 tight end, and for me, especially in PPR, he is a real stud waiting to happen. He gets a lot of targets. I expect a heap of checkdowns this year. There was a lot of passing last season, but unfortunately, he was injured for quite a lot of it. When he was healthy, though, he remained a very good option. Unfortunately, his yards per reception dropped by a full 3 yards last season. I expect that to rebound a little bit, especially with some slightly better quarterbacking at times, depending on who's under center, of course. And I think that Njoku is someone that you can get some really good mid-round value in your drafts. Another guy that could be a good value pick is Mark Andrews. He was poor at times last season, but ultimately he still finished as a top 5 tight end in half PPR. He doesn't have the upside he used to have when he was the top tight end back in 2021, but there isn't a lot of target competition around, and we did see an improved passing game for the Ravens last season. How the routes and the targets go between him and Isaiah Likely will make a big difference as to Andrews' success. But both are free agents at the end of this season, and it could be that they give Andrews every chance to win the role moving forward. He's still very young. There's no reason to think that a guy that's still in his 20s can't cement a solid role in this team for the next few years. And we've seen Travis Kelce play for at least another 5 years on top of where Andrews is at the moment. Juju Smith takes a bit of a fall for me, but he's falling even more in drafts, and he could provide you with some value. He is my tight end 8, but he's not that far away from Njoku and Andrews for me, and I could see an argument for taking him as high as 6, depending on how we see the Steelers react to using him. If he's the clear receiving tight end, then he could easily be a top 5 player as essentially the second pass catcher in this offense. Because let's face it, he's probably going to get a lot more targets than Calvin Austin, who's currently their wide receiver 2, or Robert Woods or Roman Wilson, who's nominally their wide receiver 3 and 4. For that reason, I think Smith has a lot of upside. And in certain leagues, I'm willing to take the risk on him, depending on how much I need to spend up on other positions. I feel like he could be a good mid-round value. Another guy who is great value, and you don't need to take anywhere near this spot, is Darren Waller. Waller is my tight end 9, but I've seen him going undrafted in some leagues, especially in early best ball leagues. There is a real question of how much of the season he'll play. He hasn't played more than 12 games in each of his last 3 healthy seasons, and he didn't play at all last year, but he is essentially going into that Juju Smith role that we saw make him the tight end for last season. So the upside's there, and where you're taking him in drafts, realistically, there is no one else that is going to give you the upside of a top 5 tight end like Waller would. I'm happy to take the risk on him. I know he's getting older. I know he didn't play last season. I know there's real questions over this Dolphins offense, but I think the worst O-line will actually mean they have to use the tight end more often as they did last season. And I think that Waller could end up being a real bargain. Travis Kelce has for a long time been my favorite player in fantasy, and it's got nothing to do with me being a Swiftie. I do, however, think he is someone you need to avoid in fantasy for this year. He had a drop-off in the last couple of seasons, and last season in particular, dropped all the way to just 8.5 yards per reception. I think that falls off even more this season because of the quality wide receivers coming back. If Rashee Rice plays all season, that's a lot of targets around the middle of the field gone. And I expect that Hollywood Brown is also going to be busy as well. I think the lack of quality wide receiver play was the reason that Kelce was even slightly involved last season. And we saw that even in the playoffs, they didn't use him very effectively. I think he is going to be someone that really disappoints this season, and yet he's going way earlier than the other guys around him in drafts. He is a major avoid for me, even though I do love him as a player. Tucker Graft is another guy who could really disappoint. He had some big boom games last season, but he was going at 14 yards a reception. I think with the way they use him and the way they're going to use their other wide receivers this season, I expect a potential drop in touchdowns. I'd expect a definite drop in target efficiency. So he'll need a big jump in targets to pay off, and I don't see that happening. For that reason, I'm avoiding Kraft, not just because they brought in Matthew Golden, but just because I think the play is going to cause his efficiency to drop massively. We've seen when Evan Ingram has been out that Brennan Strange has come in and essentially replaced him and played in exactly the same way. Doesn't quite get the greatest touchdown totals, but Evan Ingram never did either. Strange has 3 touchdowns in 31 games, but he was the backup for a lot of those matches. And when he's a starter, he can find the end zone occasionally, but it's more the targets that are very shiny and exciting for Strange. He was not starter for a lot of games last season, but when he was threatening double-digit targets a lot of the time. I think Strange could be someone who's a real bargain that you can get in the mid to late rounds of drafts. There's going to be no one else with this upside you're going to find, and we've seen Ingram be on the edge of the top 5, especially in PPR at times in the last couple of seasons. That could easily be Brennan Strange this year. I've got Zach Ertz as number 13. Now, I don't feel great about this, but he was a top 10 tight end last season. I think Deebo Samuel coming in could really hurt Ertz, but we should expect him as well to be a little bit healthier than he was at the start of last season. For that reason, I don't see any reason why he can't replicate a top 10 season. I do think there's a lot of downside here as he is aging, and it is possible they want to get former second rounder Ben Sinnott more involved, but I also think the upside's solid enough that it is reasonable to take him in the later rounds of drafts. Another guy who's a real risk, but with some upside, is the rookie Tyler Warren. We know from experience that rookie tight ends of late have had some success, but how much success is he going to have when Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones is his quarterback, when you've still got some solid wide receiver play, when Jonathan Taylor is the cleared lead guy in this offense? I don't think we're going to see a Brock Bowers situation, but I do think that Warren will probably be the number 1 tight end for this offense. How much value that has, we'll have to wait and see. I think the upside is relatively low, but I do understand why people are clamoring to get him. I wouldn't go out of my way to reach and get him, as I do think the other tight ends represent better value, but I can understand why some people are doing that. Dalton Kincaid had a real drop last year, not just because he was injured for some games, but he struggled to get targets. He struggled to do much with them. He couldn't even get over 500 yards, and he has 4 total touchdowns in his last 2 seasons. This role simply is not effective for fantasy. He splits all of his touches with Dawson Knox, who is on a big contract as well. I don't see that changing. This is a situation I'm inclined to avoid unless we see a Knox injury. It's really only a Knox injury that can make Kincaid good for fantasy, or a real change in how they choose to use their tight ends moving forward. Dallas Goedert is another guy who needs injuries to be effective. When AJ Brown is out, or even when Devonta Smith is out, he becomes effective for fantasy. But when both of those guys are playing, he's someone who isn't even startable. Plus, he hasn't had a fully healthy season since his rookie year in 2018, and he wasn't even the starter then. He's never had more than 5 touchdowns in a season, and he's only had 8 total in the last 3 years combined. I feel like Goedert is someone that can be a real liability on your bench and someone that doesn't give you the upside of a lot of guys you can take in this range. Having said that, I do recognize that if you're getting late in drafts, you don't have a starting tight end, Goedert is someone that you can at least use and slot in there until you can find somebody else. If you're going for a 2 tight end strategy and you're taking a risky guy and you want a safer option, Goedert can be that safer bet, even though he's near certainly going to be a tight end too. Evan Ingram has been very good at times in the last few seasons. He has 3 top 6 seasons in his career, and he's never had more than 6 touchdowns in a season, only having 1 last year, although he did admittedly miss half of the games. He was a real target hog back in 2023, and I don't see that happening with the Broncos. He was very effective in 2022, and that could be more likely to be the route that he takes. If they can use him effectively as that weapon across the middle of the field, then that could not only open up Cortland Sutton, it could make Ingram the second receiver on this team. I think that's unlikely given they've brought in Pat Bryant. Plus, they seem happy with what they're getting out of Marvin Mims and also Franklin and Vele as well. That doesn't mean it's impossible, and I could see Knicks using Ingram effectively enough to make him, say, a top 12 tight end. I think top 5 is out of the question, but I think if he gets enough targets, we could see Ingram pay off. For that reason, I'm happy to use him in PPR. In half PPR, he's a little bit lower for me, down at 17. Hunter Henry is another pretty safe option. There's not exactly great wide receivers in New England, and for that reason, we could see Drake May use him again a lot. We only saw him have 2 touchdowns last season. That could regress, and regress positively, but we did see 97 targets. He ended up as a top 12 tight end with 674 yards. That could easily happen again in another positive season where he is the clear starter. He's still young enough to perform, and I do think in this mediocre New England offense, we could see a lot of Henry some weeks. He's not, however, going to be consistent enough to be a fantasy winner for you. So you'd really want to be in a deeper league or a league where you're very strong at other positions and struggling at tight end before you're considering Henry. I do think he's going to turn into a good bye week filler this week, especially if the matchup is right, though. At 19, I've got Isaiah Likely, and this is very much an upside pick. If we see a Mark Andrews injury, then all of a sudden Likely becomes not so much a league winner, but certainly someone who could threaten the top 5 tight ends. We haven't seen that a lot with Andrews, but we have seen it happen at times, and Likely has been up and down, but mostly pretty good when that's occurred. Outside that, he is still someone that can be solid. He was the tight end 16 last season, even though Andrews was mostly healthy, and he did have those boom games like week 1 against the Chiefs. It's the upside that has me interested in him at all. In a very deep league where you actually need a starter, I don't want to start Likely on a weekly basis, but I am willing to take a swing on him in the very late rounds if I have an average tight end who I know I can start, but I'm looking for a little bit of upside. Finally, at 20, there is Mike Gesicki. If you see an injury to Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, then Mike Gesicki could easily rise up into someone who's very good for fantasy. He wasn't great last season. In fact, he's only had 4 total touchdowns in the last 2 seasons combined, but he did have very good yardage. He was moderately consistent, ended up as the tight end 15. He's slightly better for PPR than he is in half PPR because he does get a reasonable amount of targets as essentially their third receiver. But I don't think the upside is as high as most realize. I think they're really interested in bringing Eric All through and transitioning him across to being the starter. Unfortunately, he's injured, so Gesicki gets that extra contract and has another opportunity this year. I don't see him giving good for fantasy, but once you're down at tight end 20, you're getting a little bit desperate. Speaking of desperation options, if you're looking to take a late swing, let's talk through a couple of other guys. Jake Ferguson has done very little in the last few seasons, but he is ultimately someone who has top 10 tight end seasons in the past. So for that reason, if you're getting very late and you're desperate, maybe he returns to his 2023 situation when he was the tight end 8. Right behind him, we've got Mason Taylor. We saw Tyler Conklin very good last year for the Jets. It is possible, even though it's a very different offense with Justin Fields, who doesn't exactly check down, that we see Taylor turn into a Conklin-style player. I think that's unlikely, though, because of Fields being quarterback. I think he's a good option long-term in Dynasty, but short-term for this season, it's very hard to see him paying off. Colson Loveland is another guy that I like for Dynasty, but it's hard to see him paying off this season. I think we see a lot of Cole Kmet. There's a lot of other weapons with 3 good wide receivers and DeAndre Swift. They're in Chicago, so for that reason, Loveland is not someone I'm excited about. Kyle Pitts is someone I think we've been found out about enough times, and I think we know that he's someone we can avoid. He's a very poor run blocker, and for that reason, he's just not out there half the time. Even though he could end up being a top 15 tight end, the upside is massively capped by his lack of snaps. And for that reason, I'm not at all excited about him. When I do my predictive rankings going into the Fantasy Pros competition, I could see me ranking him a lot higher because I think he probably finishes around 15th as a tight end, but he's going to disappoint you on a weekly basis and he ain't winning you your league. Finally, the other guy I'll mention who goes into a similar category is Kate Otten. He's out there nearly every single snap, but he's very inefficient. He needs a heap of injuries, and they've got so many wide receivers now in Tampa that I don't see that happening. He was the tight end 13 last season, despite missing a few games, but I don't think that's going to happen this year now that they've got Mike Evans and hopefully Chris Godwin back. Plus, they've got Emeka Egbuka and Jalen McMillan has improved. That's a lot of guys ahead of Otten. I have no interest in this situation. Only other guys I'll mention, Elijah Arroyo has a little bit of upside as a rookie who could be the receiver. Noah Gray just needs a Travis Kelce injury, and all of a sudden he's interesting. Taysom Hill will have some boom weeks, and he's interesting in best ball, but he's unlikely to pay off in any other situation. Juwan Johnson is the other Saints tight end, but I have no interest in him as an aging tight end who has disappointed in general. And Chig Okonkwo was pretty good last season, but they brought in Gunnar Helm. I think his starting spot is under threat, but if he can continue through from what he did last season, it is possible that Okonkwo could at least be a top 15 tight end, as with Tyler Higbee, who is threatened by Terrence Ferguson. But if Higbee is the starter, we could see that he could easily be a top 15 tight end. He is someone that you can get very late on drafts, especially in best ball, that gives you a little bit of upside. And that's all we've got for our tight end show. And indeed, all I've got for my rankings at the moment. I'll be back talking about drafts, the best values you can get, and the best guys that I want you to look for in drafts, plus the guys you should avoid. If you got any questions, as always, hit us up on Instagram or Twitter. Plus, if you've got a draft coming up, I would like to help you. I've been doing personalized rankings for the last couple of years for a very small fee, and I found a lot of people winning their leagues for the first time, having a lot of success using them. I'll basically set you up for your draft, talk to you about how to draft and help you out, making sure you get the team that you want with the best value at every position. If you're interested, make sure you email me at benwasley23@gmail.com. I look forward to chatting to you guys next time on the Fantasy First Down.